It turns out that the U.S. is not the only one set to provide cluster bombs in the war in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin threatening to use those same weapons. Russia's president saying they have a sufficient stockpile of the controversial bombs and that Moscow will use them if Ukraine attacks Russian troops with those bombs provided by America. News Nation senior national security contributor, retired Air Force Lieutenant General Richard Newton with me right now. Good morning to you, sir. Did the U.S. not anticipate this, that other countries, particularly Russia, had the same bombs?
Well, good morning, Adrian. Indeed, Russia actually has a huge stockpile of cluster munitions. And my sources tell me they've already been used in the battlefield since the invasion back in February of last year. So there's nothing particularly new here. It's, again, out of Putin's playbook to certainly ratchet up the information war aspect of this. But nonetheless, we're in a situation whereby Ukraine is short of ammunition. And the stopgap measure to do this is to provide them cluster munitions until we can fill back up their 155 millimeter unitary rounds, which are the non-cluster variety. And so the U.S. will provide those at a very critical time, Adrian, when the offensive action is kicking off, but even more so, it'll become more robust here in the coming weeks.
But wasn't the messaging here in the United States to Americans that these cluster bombs were supposed to give Ukraine somewhat of an upper hand? Is this plan backfiring?
No, not at all. These cluster munitions will be very effective for Ukraine to go against very deeply dug in Russian forces. Some of those lines over on the Donbass region, you and I have talked about this in the past several weeks, they're 15 miles deep. And so the Russian forces are deeply entrenched. And these cluster munitions, I think, will be very effective and, frankly, wreaking havoc on Russian dug-in positions if Ukraine's going to have any success at all of moving those lines back and, frankly, creating a breakthrough so they can get Russia off its soil. I think it will be key here. Now, I also want to mention, the cluster munitions aren't necessarily just the single silver bullet. There's other capabilities that we and NATO have been providing. And I think there's still more capabilities that we need to provide, such as F-16 aircraft for close air support and Army long-range missile systems and so forth. But nonetheless, if Ukraine is going to be effective in this counteroffensive and effective soon, I think these cluster munitions are key.
Isn't the Biden administration sending a bit of a mixed message, or at least stirring more controversy? Because initially, according to Biden's former press secretary, Jen Psaki, Russia's use of those weapons, those cluster bombs, could potentially constitute a war crime. Now we're providing them to Ukraine. What are we expected to take away from that?
Well, it's not illegal per se due to international law for the use of these cluster munitions in the battlefield against military targets. There's the signatories of the 2008 cluster munitions conference several years or so ago. By the way, the United States, Ukraine, and Russia are not signatories to that. And so from a technical legal standpoint, I would take exception to that comment. It's not against international law, and it's not illegal per se. What is illegal is obviously Russia's invasion of Ukraine back in 2014 and certainly in 2022, and the horrific things that they've done to the Ukrainian people. This war is now past 500 days, Adrian, and I think we need to provide every capability we possibly can to get this war over with and to get, frankly, Ukraine's borders back to where they were several years or so ago.
But is that even realistic in a war that seems never ending? And there's certainly not a peace agreement that's going to come from all this. It sounds like what you're saying and what these bombs are providing is it's just a bloodbath.
It is, and it's a fair question because this is not going to be easy. It's not going to be quick, and it's going to be very difficult. And therefore, what I advocate for, and I've been advocating for several months, is provide them all the capabilities possibly can, again, to get Russia off their soil. But it's going to be a long, hard, bloody battle. Think in terms of, remember back in our history classes in World War I, those trench warfare conflicts that we had during World War I in Europe. Now you bring trench warfare back to the modern times in 2023, and here we are all over again. Yeah. I think it's up to us. So this doesn't last another 500 days, Adrian. I think we provide Ukraine every capability we possibly can in order to get Russia off their soil and, frankly, to get their country back in order.